poll, there are things you must consider. For more, we turn to polling expert John Johnson with Edgeworth Economics and the author of the book Everydata. And lessons can begin with how polls failed to predict the Brexit vote in the UK.
Yeah, there's some actually really valuable lessons. I think one of the biggest ones is that, it was pretty unthinkable when the entire Brexit debate started that that Great Britain would actually vote, the UK would vote to leave the EU. And as a result, that sort of skewed people's views of what the polls were actually telling them throughout. But if you looked really closely at those polls, there were two things that sort of stood out to me. One, a very large number of undecideds, even up to the very end. And those undecided numbers actually dwarfed the difference between remain and leave. So that's kind of important, but there is going to be an important parallel here to the U.S. And the other big issue was the day before the vote, 12% of the people in the poll said they might change their mind. Late-breaking decision makers really can affect what happens to the results.
All right, let's talk about the polls that are examining the presidential race here in the United States. And one day you have one that says Donald Trump's leading here. The other one says Hillary Clinton's leading here. How do you know which one you can trust and what you can take from them?
Well, we have to be careful because, you are absolutely right that almost every day we have some new poll. And, of course, people are trying to make sense of them. There are these narratives that get created based on sort of one data point at a time. And it's almost like we have a very short-term memory when we think about the polls. Today's poll is so much more important than yesterday's. We call it recency bias. But as a practical matter, there are different qualities of polls. What you're really looking for is consistency over a longer period of time. And so the first thing I would just caution people about is you have to kind of view these things in their totality. It's not today's number is Trump, tomorrow's number is Clinton, today's number is Trump. The real picture is it's a fairly close race. A lot of polls can be skewed one way or the other, and they're sort of known for that. And so you just have to be really thoughtful about each poll and putting it all into a bigger picture to get the real story.
Now, I'm sure there are a lot of things to think about, especially how they question the people. What are some of the things you take into consideration when looking at a poll?
Well, I do look really closely at the sample size. I look closely at the sort of historic biases. There are certain polls that are known to skew slightly Republican or slightly Democrat. That's kind of helpful to know. I often look at who or what the numbers look like of people polled. So, for example, there was a lot of attention to a recent Washington Post poll, ABC News Washington Post poll, where Hillary Clinton was up 12 points. But one of the things that was really important is that poll seemed to slightly oversample Democrats relative to Republicans and independents. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the poll is bad, but it's sort of an important context to know. One other thing that we should definitely think about this year is just the very large negative numbers that we're seeing across the board for both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton when we look under the polls at the questions that were asked.
John Johnson with Edgeworth